So welcome, Michael Stone. Thank you so much for being here for this interview today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I will go ahead and introduce you. Michael Stone began his career as a corporate organizational development consultant, communication specialist, and leadership trainer. He is a shamanic practitioner and ULC minister who has been teaching and leading transformational workshops for over 40 years. Michael's consulting company, Mastery of Management International, or MMI, is focused on bringing heart and meaning into the workplace. For over 25 years, he worked with Fortune 500 companies, NGOs, and social profit institutions throughout Europe and North America. Since leaving the corporate speaking and training circuit, Michael has become a producer and broadcaster with KVMR and moderates an award-winning show called Conversations, Possibilities, and Perspectives on Local and Global Issues. He is also a journalist who contributes to numerous publications, including his own e-newsletter, The Well of Light. Michael is a graduate of Sandra Ingerman Shamanic Teacher Training and has been trained in many different shamanic modalities. He has extensive somatic movement training and has completed teacher trainings in trance dance, soul motion, and Gabrielle Roth's 5 rhythms. He has brought his training in communications, gestalt, gender reconciliation, meditation, movement, shamanism, psychology, and philosophy together for a totally unique approach to in-depth personal, relational, and organizational coaching and teaching. So welcome, Michael.
Great to be here. Thank you, Jocelyn.
So I guess my first question for you is, how did you first become interested in and drawn to shamanic practices and the indigenous worldview?
Well, it's interesting. I started in probably a unique way from most people. I didn't even know I was studying shamanism for a few years because my first teacher was Gabrielle Roth. And I entered through the body and then realized that I was doing shamanic practices with Gabrielle as I started in 1974 and started working with her. And at the same time, I was working in the corporate world, and I realized how disembodied people were. And so, that's why now I teach embodied shamanism, because I recognize that there's a real threat to shamanism by the way it's been transferred to North America. And back in the 50s and 60s, when people like Michael Harner and other anthropologists were bringing shamanism into this world, they changed the way that people do shamanic journeying from dancing and hooping and hollering and climbing ropes to God and shaking their toots, really calling the spirit into the body and having all their senses and traveling with their senses. And what's happened since then is that people lay down and someone beats a drum for them and they go on a journey. But so often they leave their body behind and have out-of-body experiences and tend to dissociate. And, they have a nice trip. But I come from the corporate world. I'm interested in results. And, being in the body is where you really come back and then are in action, which there's what shamanic practitioners do really is provide a cure, and what the people who are getting the cure have to do then is actually do the practices of healing. And so I work particularly with story to engage people and inspire people on a hero's journey from what they get from their journeys, so that they're actually in action rather than, oh, I had a nice trip. It's kind of like taking an ayahuasca journey and saying, well, that was a nice journey and I learned so much, but what difference did it make to your life, to your health, to your family, to your work? So that's a little bit of how I got started.
Thank you. And what is the role of reconnecting with indigenous practices such as shamanic journeying? Why is it so important at this time on our planet? And why is it that we need, especially right now, to remember our ancient roots and use this to bring about a brighter future?
Well, I don't think it's that important to connect with the rituals. I think it's very important to connect with the ancestors and the web of life, and to know that, to tap into our cellular memory, which goes all the way back from when we crawled out of the sea onto the land. And before that, it goes back to the Big Bang 14.7 years ago, or a billion years ago. Yeah, it's billion, isn't it? Wow, that's a long time. We've only been around for, maybe a couple 100,000 years, and we're talking about an evolutionary process that's been going on. I think it's 13.7 billion years, actually. And, that's contained in our cellular memory. And so it's always been honored up until maybe, till the Western world came about. And so by connecting with our ancestors and honoring the web of life and holding things as sacred and holy, we learn to tap into the web of life, of which we're all a part. And that's really where power comes from. I remember being in the Amazon one time at a gathering of, shamans from the Andes that came out of nowhere and came down into into this little town we were in. And we were doing a little mesa, little laying out of kind of getting the energy going in this thing we were doing. And this shaman looked at me and says, "Where's your mountain?" And, I'd never been asked that before, but immediately I knew where my mountain was. I knew exactly where my mountain was. And what I realized in that moment was that when we're in touch with the web of life and the ancestors, we have a whole field of energy that we can tap on. And instead of looking at nature as a resource, minerals and trees and water and all those things, it's really alive and it has a spirit. And so when we're able to tap into our mountain or a tree or the ocean, I'm looking out over the ocean here and where I live on the Sunshine Coast, and I get enormous energy from just being in this energy. The other day I was doing an interview and a bald eagle just came and kind of did a helicopter landing on the branch right in front of my window. And it was like, So in terms of ritual, I think it has some value, but personally for me, I prefer ceremony, and the difference I make with it is ritual becomes dead. Like if you think of the Catholic Church, and they go through all the steps, and maybe people have a holy experience, and that's great. But ceremony has to be created in the moment, and it takes you at that really creative place where you're fully present between the remembered past and the imagined future, which is where we live most of the time, in the remembered past, and then we jump out into the imagined future. I'm going to win the lottery and I'm going to buy a yacht and maybe I'll contribute to people, whatever, but we very seldom spend time in that space between those two, the remembered past and the imagined future. And so, but that's where a real choice comes from. That's where we really have an opportunity to express ourselves in not only a creative way, but a holy way, in a way that whatever comes out comes through spirit. We become a hollow bone in the present, like the shamans talk about. And so our identity is gone and we're able to create and draw on all the forces of life. So I look at ceremony as very important, but a lot of ritual that people are repeating over and over again without having that creative moment, the ritual becomes dead and rote. I've heard people who do ceremonies, they always say the exact same thing, honoring the 4 directions for this reason and that reason, and the eagle and the panther and and they never change it. And it doesn't have any power because you're not calling the spirits to you when you're not in that sacred spot between the past and the future. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you've talked a little bit about it already, but can you tell us about embodied shamanism and
Sure.
your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think what I said was the essence of embodied shamanism. Shamans have always taken their body with them. In fact, they get their body in a state to receive spirit by dancing, by shaking, by, wildly getting out of their head and dropping into their heart and their feet. Their feet connects to the earth, their heart connects to the sun and the light that they are and the energy that we bring in from everything. And that moves the water in the body, the fluid in the body, so we can move with fluid. And then we're breathing when we're dancing, we increase our breath rate. And so we're really in touch with the elements, which is what we are. The earth is the clay that dances in us. The fire in the heart is what motivates our passion. The air is, it's called spiritus in Latin. We're bringing spirit into our body. And we come from the water world, not just our mother's womb, but from the ocean. We crawled out of the sea. And then that activates the spirit that lives in all things. So being embodied is to be alive. In the corporate world, I used to say, I work with heads on sticks. They only have a body to carry their head from one meeting to the next. And it's very hard to make powerful decisions when you're disembodied. You're making decisions from your head, and all your head has is memories from the past. And if you're working with just memories from the past, you're constantly living your life into the past and recreating the dramas and the traumas and the experiences from the past, and nothing new is going to happen, and nothing is going to transform. It may change, but there's not going to be any transformation or transfiguration that's going to happen if you're not in your body.
And could you expand on the idea that scientific evidence and neurology shows that our brain and our story evolve together and become
Well, that's very exciting. That's really exciting. Neuroscience has just taken huge leaps in the last 20 years. And so what indigenous people and our ancestors have always known, they're actually verifying scientifically. But one of the things that's very important in the work that I do with people, which is about really moving into a new story that has a larger context and empowers more of a hero's journey than a victim journey. And how that's been done for thousands and thousands of years has been in community, because shamans are the caretakers of the community. From my perspective, people don't name themselves or call themselves a shaman. A shaman is someone who the community says they're a shaman. And so how shamans work is they work with the whole community, and they work with the story that happens. And so when someone comes and they're sick, then they create a story of healing. When someone comes and they have troubles or they have some neuroses or something, they create a larger story, and it's witnessed by the community. So because we don't just live in our own story. We live in a story field, which is made up of stories that come from our past, from our family, from our culture, from our ancestors, handed down to us. But that story just doesn't live in the head. That story lives in the being sphere of our community. So when we're talking about neurology, it's been very clearly shown that in the development of the brain, develops in conjunction with the stories that we are embedded in. The story field shapes the brain development, and the brain development shapes the story field. So what happens with the advent of neuroplasticity and the new things that are happening in neurology, it's like there are tracks that we are going down, and those tracks, if we don't do something about them, we'll just be repeating the past in our future. So if you change the story, you begin to change the tracks. And then, as I said before, the person who receives a healing has to work on those tracks. It's like you had a sled and you went down the hill the same way over and over and over and over again. And it's just shoo. And then you go and you want to go into fresh powder, you know. And so instead of, you know, you put the sled down, it doesn't go anywhere. You know, you have to get on the steep of the hill and then start it, and you plow through the snow and it makes tracks there. And then you do it again and it's easier, and again and it's easier. Well, it's the same way with creating a neurology that supports a more empowering story. So we're creating tracks in our old story that create a new story, a new way of being in the world, and ontologically, a new way of being in the world. So, neurology has done a great service in proving what shamans have always known, is that we can change the way the mind works through story. And that can change our beliefs, which change our perception. And when you change your beliefs and you change your perception, you change your reality, you change your world. And so it's a really important, because we've lived in this Newtonian Cartesian model for so long, that we, you know, I think, therefore I am. Well, that isn't accurate. And the scientific model that it's only real if you can touch it and measure it is not true in physics either anymore. So physics and neurobiology have made huge contributions to anyone who's actually willing to take the time to look at how that relates to shamanism. There's a huge opportunity at this particular time that has never, I don't think it's ever been here. And it comes out of the destruction of our ecosystems and the fact that it's humans that have, you know, we're already deeply into the sixth mass extinction right now. How we're going to deal with it is going to be real interesting to be around. But that this is the first time in any extinction on this planet that it's been human caused. And the fact that it's human caused means that we actually are the only species that can shift that direction. Since we caused it, we also have the power to change it. And that's one of the reasons that the advent of many different things, including shamanism right now, that's happening. But there's an awakening to our interconnectedness with all of life in a way that is different than it's been in the past, because we've overwhelmed with our population the carrying capacity of the planet. We've made changes in the ecosphere that won't even show up for 50 or 100 years. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty scary in one way when you think about that, but in the other way, it's propelling us to wake up to a new level of evolutionary consciousness that's never been available, and an interconnection that I don't, you know, somewhere along the line, and maybe from the very beginning of language, we began to think of ourselves as separate. Even when we thought of ourselves as part of nature, we thought of ourselves as separate from our body, separate from each other, separate from the web of life. And so what this is causing now is a resurgence, not only of being connected to the web of life, but being connected with each other in the conversations and the stories that we tell that's never before been available. And there's a huge opportunity to actually change the way we think in a way that changes the reality of our situation and the world itself.
So, Michael, how does the prevailing culture and our own community define our identity? And how can shamanic practices help us to move past the limitations that are imposed by modern society?
So the first thing is to know where you are. And there are many ways to do that, but the most important thing is to look at your history, because the world we live in is a product of our beliefs and the stories we tell, and emphasis on the stories we tell. So our story about money or family or the world or war or relationships or men or women, all of those are constructs that have been created in language and have become our reality and therefore shape our actions. So we have to know where we are. We have to really begin to pay attention and examine to the conversations that we have with people. If we have conversations that are victim conversations, oh, you know, the state, I can't make any money because the government takes it all, or I'm just, you know, my boss is terrible to me, or, you know, all these kinds of stories that are being at effect of life, we begin to notice how much our stories are shaping our lives. And in every single area, the stories we tell and the thoughts we have are shaping our life. So the first thing is to notice what they are. Now, what most people want to do, and most human growth technologies do, is try to change or suppress or overcome them. And that fails pretty miserably on most counts, because if you're actually in the present, I don't know how to say this so people get it, it's often challenging. Why would you try to change something only because it wasn't? So when you're in the present, the minute you try to change something, you're also saying it exists at the same time. But there isn't anything but the present. So when you try to do positive thinkings, when you try to change, I think I will, I think I can, I won't know I can, I know I can, you're just reinforcing the lack. So the work that I do in narrative, what I call shamanic narrative, is well, no, don't suppress them. Notice and learn to love those stories as they arise, and realize that you can put them in a larger context, a greater bowl to hold them. So let's say that I had an abused childhood. I was molested, and, you know, I had all kinds of things happen, and a truck ran over my foot or whatever, you know. And so all those things, yeah, they happened. However, your memory of what happened is just a remembered past. It isn't actually what happened. Yes, I have a foot that's mangled and I was abused in the past. But when we keep living that into our future, then it just keeps recreating the victimhood of it. But if I can actually look at that and go, wow, you know, I was abused and a truck ran over my foot and I lost all my money and I was beaten to death, and I'm still survived and I'm still happy, and people love me. Wow. Why don't I focus on that instead of the past, constantly, you know, worrying about my limp or whatever? Right. And so, you know, that takes work. And that's the work that happens. People now want a pill. You know, they want a quick fix, some easy fix. Well, there is no easy fix. Not when you're changing those neural pathways, not when you're changing patterns that you lived with for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. No, there's work to do. And so another issue that gets in the way, I have to say, is entitlement. You know, we have a sense of entitlement. No, you're not entitled to anything. You know, you're entitled to breathe the air and walk on the earth. And that's pretty amazing in itself. That's a miracle. You know, that we're even here is a miracle. So, you know, we have to get back to the place where everything is sacred and everything is holy, and that we have the power to choose between stimulus and response. There is a place of choice always. And so something happens to me, you know, that I'm on the freeway and somebody cuts me off and I go, ow, like that. And then I go, I wonder if that person's having a bad day. You know, I'm just going to send them some love, because I don't want to be angry. Why should I be angry that this person just cut in front of me? That's crazy. Right. You know? Right. So I'm going to use that not only to notice how I get triggered, but I'm going to use that to start creating a new story that I'm not really a person who has road rage. In fact, I'm a loving person. And so we develop something from there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. No, and it goes back to what you said at the beginning. It's all about our perception. It's all about how we remember things, and then how we choose to move forward. And, very profound. And, you can see how you could change your life that way, as in the examples that you gave. But it's hard work, like you said.
And it all lives in language too. Before language is darkness.
Mm-hmm.
The studies have shown with Helen Keller and other people that when people are raised by wolves or raised without, people who can sign, that there's darkness, there's nothing. And then the minute, Helen Keller found out about water, and it was like the whole world of, whoa, there's trees, there's what's this and what's that and what's this. So language constitutes, it's right at the heart of that creation and ability to shapeshift into a new reality, literally to shapeshift. People think of shapeshifting as working with animals or, changing into an animal. Well, or a tree or a mountain. That's a great way to learn about the power that you get from that animal or that tree or that, and, and to invoke it in yourself. But they don't often think about shapeshifting into a new cultural story or into a more empowering story, which is just energy. It's all energy anyway. I mean, below language is just energy. And
Right.
so, but to have the power of language to shapeshift into a different energetic and to really alter our cultural story is pretty amazing, I think.
Yeah, very true.
It's a miracle.
It is. And all life is a miracle, as you said, just for us to be living and breathing here. It's magic.
It's pretty cool, isn't it?
It is. It really is. I had one other thing I wanted to ask you about. Could you talk a little bit about soul loss, and
Sure.
why is this an important aspect for healing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, soul loss is what happens when people have a trauma of any kind, an emotional or physical trauma, where in order to protect themselves at that time, they dissociate and leave their body. And an aspect of them, an essence of them, gets suppressed. That essence could be joy, it could be creativity, it could be being able to be open to relationship, any number of things, but it comes from as a way of protecting ourselves when we're young, generally, and something happens to us. So much of this happens in the first 8 or 10 years of our lives. And so then, that was appropriate when we were 4 or 6 or 8, but it's not so appropriate when we're 40 or 50 or 60, but we're still doing those same kinds of things. So traditionally, a shaman will work with someone and with their power animals. And things are changing in shamanism in terms of how we work. But soul loss is a really powerful thing to begin to realize, oh, there's a whole part of me that's been suppressed my whole life. And so typically a shamanic practitioner or shaman will go in with a power animal or spirit guide and look for a lost soul part. Often we'll get, a real story about where it was lost. Somebody was molested, or somebody, just there was a loud horn and they dropped everything. It can be anything like that. I mean, it doesn't have to be something terrible. Loud noise could cause soul loss. So then we walk around with this lost part of ourselves, and our behavior, of course, is consistent with that. So shaman travels and then goes on a journey, and traditionally it's about a story. So a shaman goes and tracks down the lost soul part and has to fight for it or get it back, or sneak it away. and then comes back and shares the story of that, how they brought back this, ability to open our hearts, say, okay, that bring that back. And then, I would, as a practitioner, then blow that into your heart and blow it into your crown, and that's a more traditional way of dealing with soul loss, is soul retrieval, it's called. I find, and you've experienced it by being in my class, I've found that soul remembering can be just as powerful, or perhaps sometimes more powerful, because you're bringing back that part. And again, I think when you bring back the part, there's less afterwards energy that needs to happen because you discovered it. Whereas when it's brought back to you as a story and physically, expressed into you, you have to then, it doesn't just happen overnight, you have to then do the practices, the healing practices, to rewire your brain, literally. Because it's an old habit of not opening your heart, or thinking you're not creative, or not having any joy, being dead to the world, not being able to express your joy. Those are the kinds so it's your essence that's lost. And we all have all of those things, we're born with them, but we lose them. And it's not only on an individual level, it's on a cultural level. We have huge soul loss. For instance, in North America, for one, we have huge soul loss that's never really been fully acknowledged with the native people who were the stewards of this land, or for the slaves that were brought over from Africa, our brothers and sisters from where we came, in the cradle of life, and the abuse that we have and still have towards those. Well, that's continually causing, a reoccurring soul loss. People are born into that cultural soul loss. So, that's a little overview of it. It's a bigger subject, obviously.
Yes.
That's the essence of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Very interesting to think about it culturally as well.
Yeah.
Where that's leading to a lot of the, environmental destruction and the social justice problems, all of that interconnected.
Yeah, we wouldn't be desecrating the elements and the planet if there wasn't soul loss. I mean, we wouldn't be killing people for money if there wasn't soul loss. I mean, it's like, what?
Yeah. Doesn't make any sense, and yet, that's what we have.
Continue to do it.
Yeah,
and we escalate the whole problem.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what would you tell people that are attending the summit here? As far as what they can do in their everyday lives to reconnect in these ways, and to work toward a brighter future and heal themselves.
Get interested. I think that one of the things that's missing is a sense of awe and wonder that we're here at all. That, begin to recognize the holiness and sacredness of everything. That if we allow ourselves to be allured towards what we love, to be called towards what we love and explore it in great depth, that can be our journey in itself. Most of us, at least part of our lives, is not doing what we love, which seems kind of weird to me. Because loving what arises in our heart, loving what how we meet the world, is so important. And if we meet the world in a way that it's a problem that needs to be fixed, it's kind of like if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And the other aspect of having a hammer is you can either build a beautiful house or you can kill somebody. So I think there's just not enough fascination with the world. And, shamanism is a path of direct revelation. Don't go to the experts, forget them, forget teachers like me, I keep telling people, I don't know anything you don't know. Just dig in there. And, the real teacher is our fascination with life, our fascination with, well, how is it I ended up with this story, and how do I keep perpetuating this story that I live in? That's my story and body are my two areas that I work in and what I'm known for, probably. So, yeah, is that?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you so much on the, just getting back to appreciating the magic and the beauty around us. Cause we have nature all around us every day. Even if we live in a city, we have trees, we have different things, and we just go right past it. We don't think about it, and it's a huge
now,
opportunity.
if you ask me tomorrow, I may have a totally different answer, like buy a new car, but probably not. But the answer comes from the question in the moment and responding from being present in the moment. And I think that's the important thing is, learn to be present in the moment and notice when you're, that's another thing I think, Jocelyn, that's really important. And that's that practice breaking habits. When you get out of the shower in the morning, instead of drying your feet, dry your hair, or instead of drying your hair, dry your feet, or just begin, try eating with your non-dominant hand, and spill all over yourself and practice that, or be curious. Again, I'm saying the same thing, I guess. Just be curious about the world, and instead of coming from that you already know something. Rilke has a great quote, which I can't recite, but it's really about living into the question. And the key questions are: why am I here? What is death? What's my contribution? Those are the kinds of questions that give us being in the world. Mm-hmm. And so what are the questions that you're asking about being alive? What are the questions when you wake up in the morning? Are you fascinated? Do you wake up and go, whoa, who's this person next to me? I mean, if you're not in a relationship, I'd call the police, but if you are, to bring a sense of wonder instead of thinking the person that you're, laying in bed next to, and bring a sense of wonder to the food you eat. And that's where growth comes from, is being curious. Primates all learn through play, and their early development is about play. Mm-hmm. So I think another thing is get over yourself, quit being so terminally serious and get on with it. Growth is not something that's needs so much effort.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. and I can definitely say from my own experience, to everyone that's watching this interview, that if you ever get a chance to take one of Michael's classes, definitely do it. It's quite an amazing experience.
And you don't need a teacher either.
You're bringing the wisdom out of us.
Lovely. So great to be with you, Jocelyn.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for your time. And so also to anyone watching, go ahead, definitely check out Michael's webpage on the Summit page, and go ahead and look at his information and his work. Very amazing stuff. Michael, is there anything else that you wanted to say? Any latest projects you want to update us on, or anything else you want to say in closing?
No, I just want to thank you for, just the amazing job you're doing of bringing all these wonderful people out to the world. And I guess one thing, the Shamanism Global Summit 2016 is coming right up, and you might want to check it out. I'm the host and producer of that, and I'm excited. So some of the guests you have, and some of them you don't, but it'd be a good addendum to your work.
Definitely. And what are the dates for that summit? I think it was the 19th through the 22nd.
July, yeah, 19th through 22nd. That sounds right.
Yeah,
Just
wonderful.
watch for it. Go to the Shift Network. Get on my newsletter, Well of Light. Uh, let's see, how do you do that? Just go to welloflight.com and get my newsletter. It's only once a month and chock full of good stuff.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate your time today.
Great blessings to all of you.
Thank you.